Was Abe Lincoln honest?
Does this dress make my backside look big?
Perhaps it
Well, good morning. Welcome to Salem Grace. I don't know if you're a husband or a guy in this room. Have you ever had to answer that question? Does this make me look fat? And I tell you, today I'm celebrating my, this very day, 23 years ago, I was getting married right here at Salem Grace Church of Nazarene to this beautiful woman. Yeah. It was 23 years ago, I officially became part of the Howdies, and those are the guys that you look at and you go, how did he manage to do that, married such a beautiful girl? So, but in 23 years of marriage, I have learned to answer that question. Does this make me look fat? And I'm not sure I was as honest as Abe was, but this morning we're starting a new message series this morning called "Does This Make Me Look Fat?" And I was just thinking about this when I came up with this series and thinking about the things in our life that make me look fat, and that's something. And actually, while we were sitting down here and they had the picture of the elephant up here, Pastor Mark went over to Pastor Doug and said, "You should be mad at Kay for letting him use your picture without a shirt on." All right. But this morning, I want to take a little bit of liberty with this, and over the next three weeks, I want to take a look at that question of, does this make me look fat? And some of you are like, well, over the next 3 weeks, we want to look at, does this make me look fat? And I'm hoping, my goal is, at the end of 3 weeks, that all of us will be fatter. And some of you are going, that's pretty sure that's not going to be a problem. Sitting there with Burger King coupons in your pocket, but I'm not talking about that kind of fat. And I don't know if you've ever thought about that. It typically, most of us don't ever want to appear fat, and we don't want that. Does this make me look fat? Does the things that we wear and how we dress, and we don't want to appear fatter than we are. But I want us to take a look at what are things that can make us fatter from a relational standpoint with our relationship with Jesus. And I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but I just thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if it was just cool to be fat? And it was, if we could just be fat and just love it. Pastor Mark shared a podcast I told him what we were preaching on, and shared a podcast with me this week. And there's this movement of people that are just okay with their fatness, and they're embracing their fatness. And that's kind of what I want to do from a spiritual perspective over the next 3 weeks. And I tell you, don't you love people that are comfortable in their own skin, that they're not trying to be some kind of model that they see in a magazine or on TV, or there's this concept of how we should be physically, and we're all striving for this, and we just kill ourselves trying to fit into that mold. But I love people that are comfortable being who God told them, who God made them to be, and who God created them to be. And so I'm going to take some liberty with that. But I believe many times as a church, we're focused on the negative behaviors, and I preach on those things a lot, and I'm not afraid to call some of those things out. But I believe that Jesus gave a full measure of grace and truth. And so sometimes we get focused on all the negative behaviors that we need to avoid, or the evils in our world, and we forget to remind ourselves that God is tremendously interested in filling us with a satisfying fat life here on earth. And we can be full, and we can be full of His presence and His joy and His goodness and His plan at work in our life. Matthew 5:6 says this: God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. And I really want us to get to a place spiritually over the next 3 weeks where we begin to recognize what God is doing in our lives, and how we can truly be fat, and the things that we do and our behaviors, and how we respond to Christ, and how the things that we do and that are evident in our life will make us appear fat. Not just make us appear fat, but actually make us fat. Isn't that fun? Love to be fat. So this week we'll look at some things, but really I want to answer the one question today is, does my belief and my obedience make me look fat? In other words, do I live out the hope and joy of Jesus in my daily life? When people see me, they go, wow, that guy is huge. He is full of hope in Jesus Christ. I want people to look at me. I want to be fat that way. I want to be able to share that with others, and I want that to be evident. Are we fully expecting God to do amazing things in our life, or are we surrounded and so overwhelmed by the circumstances that we find ourselves in that we're hopeless? Or do we just completely waller in where we're at spiritually and where we're at in our daily lives and the things that happen to us? And, are we there, or are we completely hopeless? Or are we really, truly expecting God to do amazing things because we fully trust in Him and we fully believe in Him to do great things? Jeremiah 29:11, and if you've been around the church for 5 minutes, you probably heard this passage, and it's a passage that gets shared a lot at graduation time. But it says Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope." That is what I want to spend some time talking about this morning, to encourage you this morning that God is, and to expect God to do great things in our lives. And more importantly, do I really believe that He can do what He says He can do? And I don't know if you've ever had to try to show somebody how to do something, or maybe you've ever had an opportunity to say, "I told you so." I don't know, it seems like a lot with my kids. I'll tell them, "Hey, this is really how this works." And they're like, "No, it's not." Yeah, I'm like, "Yes, it is." And then when they do it, and they're like, "Yeah, see, I told you so." And that's kind of a picture of what I want to share the story. And there are countless stories in the Bible of where God shares His plan to do something amazing in regular people's lives who find themselves in all kinds of different situations. And if you can page back through the Bible and read story of Moses, just a regular guy; Noah, a regular guy; Jonah, just a regular guy; David, he was just the smallest kid. He was not the pick of the litter, and God chose those people to do amazing things. And I want to share 2 stories this morning of people just like that. But there are 2 responses typically that we have when God calls us and we hear His voice speak to our life, and God asks us to do something amazing, or ask us to trust Him with the plan for our lives. And there are 2 responses typically that we see. Pretty obvious. Number 1, we accept it and we say, "Yep, you know what? I'm all in, God. Do with me whatever you want to do." And number 2, it's well, I'm not sure I trust that. I'm not sure. That sounds a little bit too good to be true. I'm not sure I'm going to allow that to happen. And so 2 stories here that I want to share with you as we go through the sermon this morning. Story of Zechariah. It's in, and you can read this in the first chapter of Luke. If you look at the first chapter of Luke, you begin to hear this story in the very first chapter. This story of Zechariah begins to unfold. Zechariah and Elizabeth, and they're the mother and father of John the Baptist, if you're for context. But basically, Zechariah, I want to tell you a little bit about Zechariah. He was a priest. He kind of just had a regular life. He was a normal, average working Joe. He really served the church 2 weeks out of the year. Kind of did his thing. He'd come to the church and do his things for 2 weeks. He was a good guy. He followed Christ. He had a job. Luke said that they were righteous in God's eyes. Him and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes. But really, they were good people living normal, average lives with its normal, average disappointments. He was walking through life. They had absolutely no children. They couldn't have children. They were older in age, and we've heard this story before a lot in scriptures. But they were older in age. They had no children, which really, during that time and period, that was pretty much everything for you to have kids. And so it would have been an enormous disappointment in their life not to have any children. And so they were going through life, just the mundane, I get up, time to make the donuts, I have no kids, this is our life, we're stuck here. It's just everyday routine for Zechariah and Elizabeth. Until one day, one day it all changed. And so the week that an angel of the Lord appeared to Zechariah, and you can read it in the first chapter of Luke, but I want to focus on verses 11 through 14. And here's where we pick up the story. It says, while Zechariah was in the sanctuary, an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the incense altar. And Zechariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. But the angel said, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife, Elizabeth, will give you a son, and you are to name him John. You will have great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth." Wow! What an awesome promise God gave Zechariah. And when you read that, you would think Zechariah, his response would have been, "Yes! Thank you, God. You have heard my prayer. He's actually answering my prayer for this son. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to have a son." Not the response we get from Zechariah. And it's interesting to me because sometimes our response to God's promises in our life are a little lackluster. Have you ever noticed that? You ever notice when you read something or God tells somebody something or you try to tell somebody, I don't know if you've ever done that. You ever talked to somebody and told them this great news and they're like, it's okay. You're like, "Are you kidding me?" You want to shake him, and say, "Are you kidding me?" Have you ever given somebody a gift like that, and you've been so excited at Christmas or whatever, and give somebody a gift, and you think it's going to be the perfect gift, and you're anxious to see them open it, and you're so excited, and they open it up and go, I wish it was a different color. You're like, "Are you serious?" It's just such a letdown. And so I think sometimes our response to God's promises are a little bit lackluster. This should have been awesome news for Zechariah. One would have thought he would have been ecstatic about that. Apparently he just thought it was too good to be true. And so we pick up the story again in verse 18, and it says this: Zechariah said to the angel, "How can I be sure this will happen? I'm an old man now, and my wife is also along in years." And here's the thing. Sometimes our unbelief can have serious consequences. He clearly by his response, he did not believe that was going to happen. He did not believe that God had in store this great plan for his life and that he was wanting to do something amazing because he was stuck in the routine of his normal, average, everyday life. And he couldn't see the big picture. And sometimes we want to see the big picture, don't we? We want to say, "Okay, God, yeah, really. I don't know if that's really going to happen. I don't know how, maybe you're sitting here this morning and you're single and you've been dating or you just can't find the right person. And you're thinking, and God says, "I have this plan for you. Trust me." But we just don't. Maybe with this morning that we're sitting here and we've got all kinds of financial mess going on in our finances and in our daily life, and we got bills that are stacking up, and we don't know how God's going to help us with that. We don't have any clue. And then sometimes God gives us a promise. We read his word, and then God gives his promise to us, and we go, "Yeah, that sounds good, God, but I'm just not sure how that's all going to work out. Not sure how you're going to make that happen." That was really kind of where Zechariah was. He had this awesome news. It's something he prayed for. And isn't that funny to me? Isn't that funny to you how sometimes that we pray for things, but do we really believe it? Do we honestly and earnestly believe that God can answer the prayers and do the things that he says he can do? Because obviously it was clear that it said, the angel said, "Hey, God has heard your prayer." So it was clear to me that Zechariah this has been something that he'd been praying for a long time. And then finally when it happens, you would think he would have been like, can't believe it. But he's not. But sometimes our responses are a little lackluster at best. And our unbelief can have serious consequences. And it did for Zechariah. And we see that, and we pick up the scripture again in verse 18. It says, the angel says, "Hey, you're going to have this son. God's heard your prayer. I'm going to do amazing things in your life. This is the plan I have for you." He's like, I'm not sure it's going to happen, not sure how that's going to work, because he couldn't figure it out. And I think sometimes in our lives spiritually, we're like, if we can't figure it out in our head, God, then, it's not going to work. And so that's where Zechariah was. And he says, well, how is this going to happen? I'm an old man. My wife's old. I'm not sure how this is all going to take place. And then you see the angel of the Lord. And this is the serious consequences that we see here. In verse 19, it says, then the angel said, I am Gabriel, and I stand in the very presence of God. I love this. It was he who sent me to bring you this good news. But now, since you didn't believe what I said, you will be silent and unable to speak until the child is born, for my words will certainly be fulfilled at a proper time. You know what God's saying here to me? God is like saying, you just shut up and watch. You just shut up and watch what I'm going to do in your life. How many times is God saying that? Is God saying that to you? Just shut up and trust me. Quit running your mouth and just trust me that I've got this great plan for your life. I want to do great things if you'll let me. So Zechariah goes home, and that has to be the first recorded game of charades that I've ever seen in my life, probably. Sounds like God, baby. I don't know what that looked like. He comes home, and his wife's like, I don't know, if he's seeing a counselor, I don't know, he just won't talk. He's giving me the silent treatment. For 9 months. Silent treatment for 9 months. He obviously answered the question wrong. Does this make me look fat? God's ideas about who is qualified may be different than our own. Remember that. How we respond is visible to those around us. It has consequences. How we respond to God's promises in our life, and you say, you know what, I'm going to claim it. And listen, I'm not big on the whole name it and claim it stuff, but I'm going to claim what God told me he's going to do, because you know why? Because God's promises are true. And what he says, he will do. We can trust that. We don't have to figure it out. We don't have to have the plan written down. We don't need to see it in black and white and all this diagram and a PowerPoint presentation, and God says, well, here's how I'm going to work it all out. Just shut up and listen. And that's pretty much what he did to Zechariah. He literally made him shut up and watch this unfold. Oh, you don't believe me? I'll show you. God will do what he says he will do. And sometimes we just need to shut up and watch God work. Our unbelief can have a numbing effect on our spiritual progress. We can be emaciated in our ability to believe God's promises for our life. We're so overwhelmed with our current situation that we can't see how things will get any better. And in the process, we can miss out on something great. How cool would it have been for Zechariah to be able to go back and say, oh, you ever been so excited to tell somebody something? I'm sure that had to be what he felt. After that happened, but then he couldn't speak. Don't let us miss out. Don't risk the consequences of not trusting God. One of my biggest fears about me leaving my job and taking this job was I didn't want to miss out on what God had for me. I didn't want to look 3 years down the road or 5 years down the road and go, I missed an opportunity to do something that God asked me to do. I want to trust him. I want to trust him 100%. I want to be fat with trust. I want my faith and my belief to make me look fat. I want to be huge. We can become emaciated and skinny in our ability to believe God promises for our life. Sometimes underestimating God is as dangerous as rebelling. You ever think about that? Our sin may not be something that we've done, but it may be, maybe our sin is being hesitant to fully trust in God. Sometimes God leaves us speechless, but more fulfilled than we ever would be otherwise. We can be certain to the promise that God is making in each one of us. I think sometimes we look at things that are too good to be true and we just can't believe it. And I remember one time when we were kids, my dad would take us to hospital visits. We'd have to, we'd be going out to eat, and he's like, hey, I need to swing by the hospital. And we were like, oh, no. And we'd sit in the car, and he'd be like, I'm just going to run up and pray. And then like 9 days later, we're eating Cheetos in the crack of the seat trying to survive. But waiting in the car for days. It felt like days we'd wait for Dad to come down. And so we would like go through, they would just leave us in the car. Is that them? No? Coming back? We'd go through the glove box, and we found, one time Farron and I found these little tracks. Dad had these little tracks in the glove box, and it looked exactly like a $20 bill. Maybe you've seen one of those, like on half of it, and you fold it in half, and it looked exactly like a $20 bill. But then when you open it up, it was like, hey, do you know Jesus? type of thing. You ever seen those? And so we were like, yes, this will be fun. So we had this game, and so we'd run out and throw them all over. We'd throw a couple out on the sidewalk, and then people walking into the hospital, they'd be like, they'd run back, grab that $20 bill. It was like instantly they'd know it. And some people were like, it's too good to be. And they wouldn't even pick it up. They wouldn't even pick it up. They'd just walk. They'd see it. It looked identical to a $20 bill. But they would just walk right by it. And sometimes I think we just walk right by stuff and blessings that God has just laid out clearly in front of us. And we don't pick it up. And if we pick those up, we would open it up and see something beautiful that He has planned for our lives. Don't miss it. Don't miss what God has for you this week. What is God asking you to do this morning? What is God asking? What is He sharing with you? What is He laying on your heart? You ever felt like God, you know what, God? And I'm going to tell you a weird story. I don't know if I've ever really told anybody this, but from the time I was a kid, and this is really weird. I know you're probably not going to believe this, but from the time I was, and it's even going to be funny why I thought that. But from the time I was a little kid, I kind of felt like I knew that this was what God had planned for me in life. But I really thought, honestly, I thought I was going to be a banker. I did, from the little time I was a little kid. And you know why I thought that? Is because I could write numbers really good. It's like, ooh, that's a pretty 7. I'm going to be a banker. That's just what kids think, you know? So I was a banker, but then I always knew that God would pull me in this direction. But I think sometimes you ever felt like God is pulling you in some kind of direction, and you just need to be obedient and listen to that. And part of that thought kind of scares you sometimes. You're like, ooh, I don't want to be a preacher. Whatever it is that God has for you in this life, trust Him with it. You'll never, ever be disappointed. Does your belief and your obedience make you look fat? I hope mine does. I hope it makes me look huge. And I believe sometimes we want to trust God. And here's the second thing I want to share with you. I think sometimes we want to trust God, but sometimes we just get it wrong. We just don't do it right. You ever notice that? I'll show you a video clip, kind of illustrate this point. I think we have a video clip here.
Close your eyes and just fall down, okay? Don't worry.
Okay, then Lauren's going to catch you.
Close your eyes. Okay.
Okay, it's called the trust fall. Okay, trust fall. Ready, set, go.
I believe that's what our trust looks like sometimes. God's saying, hey, I'm going to catch you, and we're like, a face plant. I believe we want to do it. I think some of us want to know, we want to trust God, but we just do it wrong. We're like, I'm going to trust you, God, only, if I can, let me look at my bank account. Oh, yeah, I trust you, if it's on the bottom line. Or, I'm going to trust you, but I'm really going to believe what the doctor says. I want to trust you, God, but, I want to hold on to this little piece over here. I'm going to trust you, God, with my life and my spiritual walk with you, and I'm going to trust you with my relationship with you, but really I want to hang on to all these other relationships too, because I don't want to lose that. And so I think sometimes our trust looks like that to God. He's like, hey, I got you, and then we're like, completely the wrong direction. For God to lead us, we must be ready to respond to Him. Do you get that this morning? For us to lead, for God to lead us in our walk with God, we've got to be ready to respond appropriately when He asks us to do something. When He asks us and He shares His plan with us and says, hey, this is really what I want you. And I want you to point out in both of these stories I'm going to share, I'm getting ready to read another one out of Luke. But in Zechariah's story, when the angel of God appeared before Zechariah, let me just tell you, I don't know about you, but I have never had an angel come and talk to me. It's never happened. But I got to believe if there was an angel of the Lord that appeared to me in all of its radiance and Gabriel was like, Trent, I would have been like, yes, let me change my pants. It's scary. I think we would have, and that's exactly was Zechariah's response. And it's exactly Mary's response. We see in Luke chapter 1, verse 30, same chapter, different response. Here it is. What a great picture of obedience and done right. This is the way to do it. Mary, mother of Jesus, verse 30, angel appears before her. First thing he says, don't be afraid, Mary. Don't be afraid, church. When God appears before you, it's scary. Let me tell you, when He asks us to do something, and He appears and he comes in all of His fullness and His radiance and His glory, can be scary. But He's saying, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, church. Don't be afraid, Mary, the angel told her. For you have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be very great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David. It can be scary. I can't imagine Mary, really young girl. She had to be thinking, why me? Why have you picked me? I'm just doing my thing, God. Just leave me alone. Could have been her response. But here's her response. In Luke chapter 1, verse 38, it says this. Mary responded, I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true. And then the angel left her. May everything you've said about me come true. What a beautiful picture of obedience. She'd say, it's not going to happen. No way, God, you can fix that in my life. No way you're going to bring forth a son in my life and he's going to be Jesus. He's going to change the world and everybody are going to be still talking about him 2,000 years later. No way is that going to happen because I'm just this little girl. She wasn't great. She hadn't done anything magnificent in her life. She was just obedient. God doesn't call people who are equipped, but he equips those he calls. Mary's respond perfectly for someone with absolutely no credentials. She had absolutely nothing other than availability and responsive to what God has called her to do in his life. Mary paints a picture of going wherever God wants to lead and knowing that he will supply whatever is lacking. And I love this sentence here. Shared it this morning. The band. Do you realize that there is absolutely no room in God's plan for us to have an inferiority complex? Do you get that this morning? I don't care who you are, or what you've done, or where you've been, or what degree you have, or what degree you don't have, and what level of education you have, and who your friends are, and whether you're church friends, or whether you're raised in the church, or this is your very first Sunday in church. I could care less about that. We have absolutely no credentials. God can use you. Isn't that great? It's just, are we fat? Are you fat enough to accept God's will for your life and be obedient and respond to that? Use me as your will, is what Mary said. Use me as you will. And basically she's saying, I'm not going to not serve you just because I don't feel qualified. I'm not going to not do what you asked me to do. I guarantee. You read through these stories in the Bible. These guys always listed 100 reasons why you couldn't do something. There's 1,000,001 reasons. Well, God, God called me. There's 1,000,001 reasons why she could have said, hey, I'm not going to do that, Jesus. Just not going to do it. Use me as you will. I'm not going to not serve you because I don't feel qualified or unusual. Every Sunday, I don't feel qualified. Every Sunday, I tell the band down here in this little room, you see us come out of there, you wonder what we're doing in there. We're eating donuts, primarily. No. But we spend time in there to get our head right, come out of here, because you know why? Each one of us up here on this platform, and myself included, feel absolutely unworthy and unqualified. Some people look at me and go, well, Trent, you haven't been to seminary? Nope. I haven't. You don't have a degree in religion? Nope. I don't. I'll be district licensed for the first time in July. Did you know that? Preacher, no license. God will use you if you let him. If you're obedient. And it's scary. It's all get out. But if we get to the place, Mary asked me, does my obedience make me look fat? I'd say, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Does your obedience make you look fat? Does your belief that God has something good for you make you look fat? I believe he does. His good and perfect, pleasing will for our lives. It's exciting. You want to live where it's exciting? Ask God to do something in your life. Be vulnerable and say, you know what? I have absolutely no qualifications for this job, but if this is what you want me to do, God, I'm going to do it. I don't know how it's going to work out. I don't know how I'm going to teach that class. I don't know how I'm going to lead that grow group. I don't know how I'm going to volunteer in ministry. I don't know how I'm going to go to CR and change my life. I don't know how I'm going to do things. I don't know how this is all going to work out. I don't know how I'm going to really stand up and teach a class. I don't know how I can be an usher. I don't know how I can be a greeter. I don't know. All those things God is asking us to do, and we're going to talk about that here in the next couple of weeks. If you hear nothing else, spiritual greatness is not a matter of your social class, your monetary clout, a degree. It's a matter of your heart. So let your soul delight in its fatness. Remove all the obstructions, tear down the barriers, and let your soul find the fulfillment of its deepest longings in a fellowship with God. I'm going to ask the band to come up. I tell you what, it's a great place. I love, sometimes we had a meal and we always think about Thanksgiving. And you have that image of, I shared with Mark, you always have that image of Thanksgiving where you just, you've been there when you've just had one more helping than you should have. And you got to unbutton that top button. Just let it bulge out there. It's where I want you guys to be in your fullness with Jesus Christ. It's where he wants. That's what he wants for us. That's what he wants for our life. I want you to stand this morning. And really it's not, it's not that. I'm not sure what he has for each one of you. I really don't. I wish I knew. Because then I'd be coming up to you going, hey, you need to do that. You need to just let God work in that part of your life. But I believe that God has something great in store for each one of us. And it may take years for that to unfold. It may not be something that's going to happen overnight. It may take years. Zechariah and Elizabeth waited years to have a child. They were old. And I was talking to Pastor Mark this week too, and pointed out something that I thought was amazing. You think about this story and you think about these two responses. Zechariah and Elizabeth were old. Mary, just a young girl. I think sometimes when you're younger, you're willing just to say, you know what, God, yeah, I'm good. Let's go for it. When we get set in our ways, and some of us have been around here a long time, and God asks us to step outside of our comfort zone, we're like, I don't know how that's going to work. It's a beautiful picture. I'll leave you with a passage in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 through 6. It says this: trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend upon your own understanding, because I guarantee it's not going to make sense. Seek His will in all that you do, and He will show you which path to take. Love that. So does your belief and your responsiveness make you look fat this morning? I want mine to. I want it to make me look enormous. I want to trust Him with everything, with all of my heart. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads this morning. Maybe God's asking you to do something. Maybe He's been speaking to you this week. Maybe He's answered a prayer and you're like, man, I don't know how that's even going to work, God. But trust Him and see it for the answer of prayer that it is in your life. Maybe you're still praying for something like Zechariah. Maybe there's something in your life and God hasn't answered it yet, but I promise He has a plan. I'm going to ask you to think about that this morning. What is God asking me to do? What kind of response is God looking for me to have? Is He telling me just to shut up and watch what He can do in my life? I'm going to ask you to pray with you this morning. Heavenly Father, let's pray for our church. Oh God, help us to trust You. Help us to see that You have a beautiful, full, exciting plan for my life. That You want me to be fat with Your goodness. That You want me to be full of Your glory. Help other people to see that in my life. God, if there's somebody here this morning that hasn't even made that step, and maybe their first step is just to accept You, that God, that they would just pray this prayer: God, forgive me of my sins. Help me to know You so that I can begin to experience the full plan that You have for my life. That I can begin to experience the fullness and the peace and the satisfaction and the joy that comes from knowing You. Come into my life, Jesus. Fill me with Your presence. Make me fat and full of Your goodness, that it spills out. Lord Jesus, I just thank You so much for our church. If there's somebody here that prayed that prayer, if you could just slip your hand, nobody looking around, just slip your hand up so I can just see that this morning. Yep. We pray for those. God, I just thank You, God, for those that have prayed that prayer in their heart. Lord, I just pray that You would take us from this place this morning, knowing that we've been in the house of God, that we've experienced Your goodness, that we've experienced Your presence here this morning. And I just ask that You would take us to our homes and to our jobs this week, where that will just spill over to everybody around us. That those around us will begin to see You in us because of what we believe You said is true, and that we trust it, and that we're not going to doubt it, and that we're going to claim it this morning. God, thank You so much for Your goodness and Your grace and Your faithfulness in our life. In Your precious holy name I pray.